Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and today I'm sharing a conversation that I had with executive coach Dr. Alison Chaney on coaching frameworks, the amygdala hijack, and Marshall Goldsmith's transactional errors. There are tools and frameworks in all industries, and the more you can understand how to use a framework or tool, the more impactful you can be in a coaching session or in a leadership interaction.
So good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to start by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us your style of coaching.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Natasha. What a blessing to be here together. So I'm Alison Walling. My new last name is Chaney after getting married. So I have a background in adult learning and leadership, and that's where I did my research. I got my doctorate in that field, and I'm a management consultant. So I go inside of organizations and deliver leadership development programs. So it's really fun to be in that space with leaders and their leadership teams. So that's who I mainly coach when I do my coaching, is leaders and leadership teams. And I would say my style is one more where I'm trying to empower my clients to get to the answers and the solutions as best as they can on their own, but also dialing up and dialing down some of my own personality to help bring out the best in them. And so I know I have a strong personality. I'm the type where I'm pretty expressive and I love to empower and inspire people. And at times I need to really boost up that bit of challenging to help my clients to just really turn up the heat and the volume. So I find that my style is one where I'll probably most of the time be trying to promote people to get to where they want to be. But then also there's quite a bit of challenging that can come in. So that's a part of my style too that you wouldn't really know about.
I love it. And it's really interesting too. I like how you said empower, because I think sometimes also with a person who knows how to empower other people, and if you encounter someone who has not really experienced that before, they haven't been empowered, I would imagine that there's also a little bit of not tension, but they don't know what to do with that. So have you experienced that, and what do you do in those situations?
It's funny because there's this one type of personality characteristic, we'll call it like being an empath. So somebody who really is empathic, concerned, wants to lift up others. That's the personality type that I would say I'm more of, is an empath. And so when I coach other empaths, it's important for me to also recognize and detect when that could be getting in their way. And so, oftentimes empaths are attracted to people who are more self-centered and have some narcissistic characteristics. So to be able to help my empath clients notice when they're actually being drawn into a dynamic that's not healthy, one where they're giving too much, they're too soft, they're not pushing back enough, not challenging enough, they don't have strong enough boundaries. That's where I can really help a lot of my clients detect that and boost up their skills and ability and capacity to dial down the empath and turn up more of the boundary setting and challenging piece.
Well, it's so important just because as professional adults, we encounter all types. And so to learn how to better leverage what we have and like kind of show up in a way that's empowering for everyone in the room, I think is really important. So what other types of frameworks do you use in your coaching?
Yeah, when I'm coaching teams, I really appreciate, there's a team effectiveness model, and it's by Ruth Wagaman and Richard Hackman from Harvard. And that model is really helpful because it takes into account the system, that the team as a system, and then also within the organizational system. So it explains and describes the essential conditions that are needed. There are 6 conditions necessary to be an effective team. And what I find it so powerful about that model is often oftentimes in teams, we think that it's somebody else's personality. So like when I was talking about the empath, right? Or somebody who's maybe just a little bit too soft and needs to set better boundaries. Well, personality is just only one piece of an equation of making an effective team. Oftentimes, our personalities get turned up or dialed back because of the system that we're in. And so if we can better diagnose and help support the team as a system. So for instance, if a team doesn't have a compelling purpose that people all agree on and understand together, they're not going to be shooting and aiming for that same direction in the future. With that lack of clarity, some people may lean more on their anxious characteristics and not be as healthy and productive because they feel like they're not on the same page as the other people on the team. Oh, well, I thought we were trying to aim for this sales goal. Oh, I thought that we were trying to aim to just grow our business with this type of clientele. And when people are aiming in different directions and don't have a purpose that's cohesive and clear and challenging, that can be a really common issue where individuals on the team will indeed then point fingers and say that it's somebody else's fault. But there's an essential condition there that hasn't been put in place.
Yes, and I think that a lot of the teams that I've worked with or even been on, if you ask each person in the team, like, what do we do here?
Yeah.
Everybody has really different answer, or they really think that the end state is something really different. And I like that you also said that with that model, it talks about the system, right? Because people will kind of adapt to what the system encourages. That's not really the right word, but whatever the system tolerates.
Yeah.
And then that'll just kind of like be the norm. And instead of, it's hard to fight against a system. So I like that it looks at the system as, how can that be different? How can that be changed?
Yeah, exactly. And so like, for instance, I'm working with one healthcare team right now where they're taking a step back and they want to really gain a better sense of what their strategy should be for the year ahead, given all the continued uncertainty and the ambiguity about who's going back, who's going to be virtual, and just budget and finance, the profit and loss, everything about the business has changed dramatically. So how do we develop a strategy together as a team if we're so unsure and so uncertain? So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll bring in a model like the team effectiveness model and help just identify where are some of the weak conditions in the team that need to be worked on. And in doing some of that work, then comes about other strategy tools. So I love strategy tools. I taught a class on strategy at Columbia for a while, and some of the tools that we used in that class that were really fun and effective, and I use in coaching all the time, is like, for instance, it's called the strategic learning framework. And it's a 4-step process that's similar to a SWOT analysis, but it's so much more than a SWOT analysis. It's not just looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's also looking at, okay, do we have that clear vision? Do we have a value proposition that we've written up and developed? Like a Southwest Airlines back in the day had a very compelling, value proposition. Hallmark has a very compelling value proposition. And when we have those pieces in place, then from there, let's take a look at the system. Okay, do we have the rewards, incentives in place to help us focus on our critical priorities? What are our critical priorities? What should they be given our competition in the environment? And so the steps in this 4-step strategic learning process, it was developed by Willie Peterson at Columbia Business School. He wrote a great book called Strategic Learning and has a workbook that teams can use to go through it. Super powerful and effective, and one I use with teams all the time. So that's another strategy tool. So I would say those are the 2 that I'm really using the most lately, especially just given the context in the world that we're in right now, where so many teams and leaders are trying to identify where are we going, especially in the constant ambiguity and change.
Yes, and again, I just appreciate that, the systemic view, but I think that more than a systemic view, it's a holistic view, because with individuals, people are they're going through a lot right now. And each of us is really kind of figuring out what this normal for us looks like, even in our own lives. Yeah. And I know when I talk to some of my friends, one of my friends, she's got 8 children, right? So it's like they're running around and she's trying to do her job, and her adapting is very different than my adapting, right? And my ability to not have people around and have kind of that alone time and just as people are figuring it out, I think it's really good to focus on kind of like what can we as an organization do to empower people more and to help move this forward instead of kind of focusing on the eaches in a time when it could change tomorrow or the next day, which is life, but life is a little crazier right now.
Absolutely.
And I knew that I had been in your amazing class at Columbia for the Benavides Leader Development Program. And in that class, that was actually the first time I had heard about Marshall Goldsmith's transactional errors. I love how you taught us that in the class and how we interacted on it. But I also have found that it's been really empowering for me, just as a human being, but also as a coach after that, where you're like, man, there are these little things that we don't even realize we're doing that's impacting how this conversation goes and how this relationship is ultimately built. So let's talk about those transactional errors.
Sure, my pleasure. Yeah, where do you want to dive in? There's so much to chat about those. I love them. Marshall Goldsmith is a world-renowned coach, and he wrote a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. What he's aiming for is that some of the habits and the ways of showing up have made us so successful and have become so ingrained in the way we are today. But if we want to continue to grow and develop, a lot of those habits and those ways of thinking are not going to serve us anymore because we're just moving into another chapter that requires a different set of skills. So the classic case in point is an individual contributor who's worked really hard at making a name for him or herself, and in becoming so skilled and an expert in a subject matter area is then asked to lead people. Well, and when it comes time to lead people, what worked to get tasks done and to be an expert doesn't apply to necessarily all the time to leading people, right? So what got you to that place of being an SME and then leading people, entirely different ballgame. And so a lot of the habits that he came up with are habits, ways of mind, ways of thinking that leaders face in their life at some point. And they're habits of mind that have really helped and served them get them to where they are, but they're not going to continue serving them in working with other people, especially in an interpersonal nature. So there's 20 of them. And they're the common ones that you'll see in the workplace. And I'm sure, like, as anybody, if you were to go down the list and read through them, would say, oh, I know somebody who does that one all the time. Oh, I think I do that one pretty frequently. And so just having them kind of in your back pocket is really helpful. And I always say, start with yourself. Which one of these on the list is really commonly coming into your life day to day? And how do we then see how has it been serving you in the past? But what do we need to change because it's not serving us anymore?
And I remember, I think it was Dr. Warner Bird, he had made the excellent point, makes a lot of excellent points, but he had also made the excellent point that there's no actual evidence to say that just because you could technically do a job, that then meant that you could lead people who do that job. Yeah. And I think it goes so counter to, even though I know he did that research a while ago, I think it's so counter to how we behave as professionals, where we think it's this linear thing. You get to a point and then you're the leader. But yeah, again, you see people kind of fall on but I did all this stuff and I've been successful for 20 years.
Yes.
I just need to keep pushing forward with that. So I think that's just to kind of, again, to have that first self-awareness of which of these do I do, or can I secretly admit to myself that I do if you need to do that. But to also acknowledge that, like you said, they're different skills. These are two different skills, like the doing and then leading, just the decisions that have to be made. You cannot think like someone who is doing a specific role. You have to be thinking about everybody's role for an organization.
Yeah, exactly. And like a couple, for instance, on the list, just so that people are familiar with some of examples of what they might be. The first is winning too much, the need to win at all costs and in all situations, right? And that really helps, especially if you're in sales and you've become like an expert salesperson. But then when you have to lead a sales team, you can't win it all. You got to share, some of the winnings, right? Adding too much value, that overwhelming desire to constantly add our 2 cents to every discussion, or to show that we know something about something. On that point, it could be something like, for instance, claiming credit that we don't deserve. So you're working with a team and it's a whole bunch of hands that went into creating some sort of an outcome, and needing to feel like that's mine and I need to take ownership for it is another. So there's 20 of these. It's really common. And I think the more we can be humble and catch ourselves in the moment of how we might be showing up and annoying other people by them, because that's another thing, is there habitual patterns and ways of thinking that we may or may not know could really be rubbing other people the wrong way.
I really put a lot of value on achievement. And I'm also very much like, if I did something yesterday, that was yesterday, and today is a new day, and now we need to achieve something else.
Yeah.
If I don't continually achieve whatever I'm trying to achieve in my own mind, whether that's something quantifiable or not, I tend to get very too wrapped up in that. And then it becomes about this quantifiable like scoreboard. Again, it's just all in my head. Yeah. And but that can be harmful to the people around me, because whether you say it or not, you've almost set this expectation of like, you have to achieve and always achieve at all times. And that's how you bring value, when people achieve and bring value in a lot of different ways.
Yes. It's like the metaphor of, do you feel like you put a goalpost for yourself, you kick the ball, and just as the ball's about to go through it, you inch the goalpost out further and you have to keep kicking. It's like the goalpost that never ends. That metaphor is so helpful.
And also that pressure that one puts on themselves, it also does not necessarily set, as a leader, it doesn't set a good example for others to like take a beat and do some self-care, and that stuff's important too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many leaders I'm working with today have that additional added pressure because they're working from home more and the responsibilities are around the clock. So the family home life is blended now with work, that they really can't seem to put a boundary around their tasks and their responsibilities to stop and say that was enough. And if somebody, has found that their flexibility in their schedule has allowed them to help out their kids in the middle of the day, but then sign back online at night before they go to bed, there's another added pressure of, oh my goodness, they're responding to emails at 10 p.m. I must need to respond to emails at 10 o'clock or 3 a.m., whatever it is. And so that need to unplug and recharge is so crucial right now. I actually just did a webinar on that called Unplug and Recharge. And it was helping leaders practice together, taking a pause and understanding the neuroscience behind the power of unplugging and recharging.
And that ability to set that boundary. But then especially now when we can't compartmentalize our lives. I can't leave work and leave work at work, right? Work is 6 feet away from me at all times. So that ability though to set those healthy boundaries. And even, for example, just use your example of the person who kind of has to log off to take care of their kids and they log in later. But maybe to just say that, like, hey, in the middle of the day, I'm taking care of my kids. I'm on at these times. No expectation of response, and to give people that 24 48 hour response time with respect to what's going on with their lives.
Yes. It all just takes intentionality, and that's what I think so powerful about coaching is when we take a specific discrete period of time and say we're going to hit pause and think about what do we really want right now, and what are we aiming for. What are the barriers that are getting in our way? Coaching helps build that practice and that muscle of the importance of being super intentional in life. And it applies then, starts to trickle over into all of our relationships. So I found that so many of my clients have begun to take what they've learned in their coaching journeys and started bridging it over to the rest of their lives. And they're like, oh yeah, now I just schedule some time with my partner or a family member or a friend, and we think through what we want, and it really helps. And marking the calendar and doing that is so powerful and important. So those are some of those more like informal habits and tools that are really healthy. and the alternative of these unhealthy ones that we were talking about, from the bad habits, the transactional flaws, we call them. So, there's so much out there that's super helpful. And this list of these 20 behaviors, I think, can also be like categorized into maybe 2 chunks or components. So it doesn't seem so overwhelming that there's 20 things on this list. We could probably distill it down to 2 main buckets, and getting to know and have a better idea of which bucket or category could I be in today, and how can I maybe be thinking a little bit more about, working on that. So I'd be happy to chat a little bit more about that. But I know you've also thought about this list and categorizing it. Anything come up for you?
So I wish that I had thought of just putting it into 2. I love that. Yeah, as I was looking at it, it was really, I would say it was kind of like this self, and this is perceived, like perceived self-inflicted and then perceived other-inflicted. So I guess if I would kind of put in these 2 things, and again, it's all perception, because oftentimes like we designate ourselves as something and nobody designated that for us at all. And so, so when we are looking at them, I've been trying to kind of look at them in a new way, where it's, how can I actually kind of work through doing some self-coaching, if you will, and say, is this something that I would view as other focus that I think someone else is putting on me? And then let me deconstruct that.
Yeah. Neat. I could see that with this list too. Absolutely. The self and then the other perspective. Yeah.
It's very confronting in a way, where when you look at them, it's like, whether I say it's me focused or other focused, I'm the one who's saying them, right? I'm the one who's doing them. So then there comes that personal responsibility of, so either that is other focus and now I'm buying into it, and now that's how I'm behaving. And what do I need to do to kind of overcome that? Or if it's this other thing, then again, healthy boundaries, where it's like, I need to set a stronger boundary, a more clear boundary there, so that that's not something that becomes a bigger problem.
Sure.
Yeah. So what about for you?
So I was thinking about how these really all stem from a worldview, like the glasses that you have on right now through which you're seeing the world. You could take off one set of glasses and put on another. So let's say we have two sets of glasses, and we have a choice of which ones we want to put on. And these are more like negative frames. They're dusty frames that need to be cleaned up. And so we can talk about what it would look like to clean them off and put on more productive glasses. The 2 buckets that I found that they fall into is it's in the mindset literature you would learn about. So for instance, having a fixed mindset compared to a growth mindset, and that's spoken about by Carol Dweck in her book Mindset, and Heidi Grant. They both did research together at Stanford. So if some of you are familiar with those mindsets, that's one set of glasses. And then another set of glasses would be like a scarcity mindset, not having enough, not being enough. And so in the former, if we put on our fixed mindset glasses, and maybe even our judger mindset glasses. So Marilee Adams, who wrote the book Change Your Question, Change Your Life, she talks about having a learner judger mindset. In the fixed mindset, it's thinking that life is a ladder, and we could put everybody on the ladder. We each have a set rung that we're on, and I'm either above you or below you on that ladder. And the way I view my skills and my abilities is set in stone. And so I most of the time probably feel like I need to be the best at something. And so I always want to be at the top of the ladder, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect being on that rung of the ladder. And so an example of one of the behaviors or habits from this list is that winning too much, that need to win at all costs in all situations. Also passing judgment, the need to constantly rate others and impose our standards on them. Another one could be, just that telling the world how smart we are. So needing to prove that we have a set of skills and abilities that make us better than others. So those are 3, for instance, examples that when we have those glasses on, that's how we're seeing the world. And then there's the other set of glasses where if we have that scarcity mindset, thinking that there's a limited amount of pie for all of us to eat. And say if there's 8 slices in a pie, if Natasha, you take a slice of the pie, well, then that means 1 less slice for me. Whereas an abundance mentality is there's plenty of cheese, tomato sauce, dough. We can craft a pie that is delicious and that many of us can eat, and we can maybe even make other things out of the ingredients of the recipe, like lasagna, meatballs, and things like that. So having more of an abundance mentality, that I'm not always fearing that there's not going to be enough. And so even like withholding information, that's a common habit. So holding on to what I know and maybe even also holding on to power and decision making and not letting others have some say or control is again coming in. It's rooted in this belief that there's not enough. So there's inherent beliefs underneath there that if we better understand, we can change those beliefs and then change these habits.
Yes. And I really also love that metaphor of the glasses, right? Whether you're like that view, because I think also as we become more professionally mature, as we have kind of like more reps in the professional world, and we get to work with all kinds of leaders, positive and negative, but really see how all of that shifts as well. Because I think that in some places there is it's very competitive. And if it's not you, it's going to be me. And if it's not me, it's going to be you. And, healthy competition is fine, but that kind of competition is damaging. But then as you kind of get more of this experience, this professional maturity, I think that, you can, then you get to like put on your leadership glasses or put on these like decision making, but really be able to look at it through, it's not, we can make more things with the ingredients, right? We can make 100 more pies. It's not a big deal. Instead of being so worried about someone having something that we don't have.
Yeah. And that's such a great point too, about you're kind of like alluding to the system that we're in, and the organization and the setting that we're in also influences sometimes the glasses that we put on. And so I'm working with a major insurance organization right now, and they have a leadership development program that we're delivering, and it's teaching their leaders about the power of making that switch from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And so the organization has seen the power of empowering people to make that choice for themselves, to see, okay, here's where I'm tempted to have a fixed mindset. And it's probably because there's something also going on in the environment that's activating that mindset. So what could it be? Oh, it's a threat that if we don't win this, this is the negative consequence that's going to happen. So then we need to maybe change some of the rules and expectations about failing and experimenting. And so the organization is working on promotional systems and ways to enable teams to experiment and learn while not being penalized. And so there's a lot that an organization also needs to do to support leaders and professionals to take off the fixed mindset glasses, to take off the scarcity mindset glasses, and to put on mindset glasses of abundance or growth. Can't put all that responsibility on the leader, yet they do have the choice and control at the end of the day of which glasses they're going to pick up and put on.
Yes. And they're also setting an example for everybody else in those choices. You can have a good environment. And if somebody comes from an environment that is not like that, it can kind of take them a little bit of time to get used to, like, we're not out to get you. This is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And something we teach in this program that I was telling you about is the neuroscience of threat and reward in the brain. And so our brains are hardwired. We have 5 times more real estate in our brain to detect threats than we do to detecting rewards in our environment. And so imagining that, just like every day, day in, day out, we're set up to be looking out for threats in our environment. Yeah. And then similarly, it takes at least 3 rewards to offset 1 threat that we experience. And by rewards, I mean psychologically safe moments where we feel like we have the certainty that we need, that we have that sense of relatedness with a colleague that is nourishing. And then that lends itself to another model that's really powerful that you may be familiar with. It uses the acronym SCARF, but it's the 5 domains of social threat and reward, so that we can start to realize for ourselves, okay, I'm about to go into a meeting. I'm lacking some certainty about the agenda of the meeting. I'm not quite sure what it's going to entail, but rather than immediately go to it being a threat, why don't I have a set of curious questions I'm going to come into the meeting with and not assume and start off in a position of defensiveness? So we try to teach leaders to detect those 5 domains of either threat and then promote reward in themselves and in others that they're leading, so that they can really function at a productive level. Because if we're in a threat state in our brain, that amygdala hijack we're experiencing actually reduces our ability to think clearly and rationally, our cognition, to perceive the world clearly, our perception, to collaborate with others, to be creative. And it really has an impact on all 4 of those areas that are essential in order to be productive in the workplace. So yeah, you can see how all of this just comes together. Our mindset, our beliefs, our behaviors, our emotions are all super intertwined. And the more we can understand them, the more we can have some choice and control over how to show up, like you said, in a healthy way. So super important.
And I believe it was in the book, The Gift of Fear, that I had read that, when we do sense a threat, it also, that like amygdala hijack, but it lasts for longer than we think it is. It lasts for about 18 minutes, even though it could be over in seconds. But during that time, our brain cannot take in new positive good things. It's too busy trying to calm itself down and get back into balance. Growing up, my mom had always really kind of ingrained in me that if something goes wrong, can you handle it? What's the worst thing that could happen? And could you handle that? You can handle it, you can figure things out. That's what you do. Yeah, if you go in there and if hypothetically we got fired, okay, we're going to find something else. It's not the end of the world.
Because there's that part of the brain, it's called the anterior cingulate cortex. It does not discriminate between social threat and physical threat. So it's immediately detecting that there's a threat, but it's not saying, oh, this is social, it's not a bear. It processes a snake jumping out in front of you on a hike the same as it would an email from a colleague that is, offensive. So much so that some social researchers have found that taking an aspirin when you have a heartache, like a romantic rejection, say for instance, or a loss of a loved one, aspirin can actually quell the pain just as well as it would if you got a foot injury. And so our brains, the way we process pain, it just doesn't discriminate between those 2 types. So it's pretty powerful.
That is. And I know that also the things that we know are what are safe to us, even if kind of what we know is not the most healthy thing. A lot of times I see people kind of stay in an industry or a type of job, and they're not happy and they want something different, but it's because it's known to them, it's safe. You talk to them and it's the same conversation all the time.
Yes.
That cycling, and they don't even realize that cycling just because in their brain, it's safe because it's known.
Yes, it's predictable. Yes, our brain likes predictability, and it will close loops and use heuristics and shortcuts to just create that predictability. Absolutely. A really great book and a tool that has helped people who want to make change. It's called The Immunity to Change, and it's written by Robert Keegan. You may be familiar with it. And Leahy, the 2 co-authors wrote that together. And they have what's called the Immunity to Change map. And there's a PDF of it online if you Google it, and it's easily accessible along with the instructions of how to complete the tool. But it talks about how we usually just always have a competing priority, and the competing priority that's rooted in the greater fear is going to win. So if the fear of the unknown of another job is so much greater than the fear of what we do know about our current job, that's going to win. We're going to stay. We're going to stay where we are. So identifying the underlying fears that we may not even know are at play and are driving and motivating our decisions and our behaviors is at the root of making those really deep changes. And so I use that tool a lot in my work with coaching clients, because they need to talk through with somebody else out loud and identify and unearth what are those deeply rooted beliefs that that are grounded in a fear that's going to win. And it works when you figure it out.
I know that for myself, in transitioning out of the military, it's a lot of people in the military also like, are you crazy? You stay till this long and you retire and all that. And I was like, no, I know I'm ready for something else. I'm going to be fine. And even though, I'm gaining traction and everything is fine, there are still those parts of me though, that kind of like, it's not a fear, but it's just more of a struggle of what if it like kind of doesn't work out. So I think that it's important that no matter how comfortable you are with change, which I'm very comfortable with change, there are still those moments where you just have to, I always say, like, just kind of breathe into it. Like, no, like you didn't want that and it was damaging for these reasons and you do want this other thing. And what are the steps to get there? But that no one, no matter how comfortable you are or how intent you are on making a change, you're not immune to being like having those moments where you just need to journal and meditate for a while and you'll work.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of work that we need to do on ourselves.
Yes, I always joke that I'm like, I'll go through these sprints of self-development, and then at the end I'm like, that's enough self-development for a while. I just need
a little break.
What inspires you about coaching?
Oh gosh. Well, I'll tell you my first moment of realizing that I have to make coaching a part of my life. I was taking a class with Dr. Malpia at Teachers College at Columbia University. And in that class, it was an emotional intelligence class. We had a chance to try on in groups of 3, trios, what it's like to practice coaching each other in a small group conversation. And so one person was the one asking questions and listening as the coach, the other person was the coachee, and then the third person was the observer. And I realized how quickly you could help somebody get to a really incredible insight and how powerful it is because they got there with the help and guidance of really powerful questions and listening and somebody who's safe and trustworthy. So I decided I'm going to give this a try this weekend when I go to the beach with my mom. And that's what I did. We were just, laying on the beach on our towels, hanging out, and we were talking through something. And I started using the questioning framework. It's called the ORID by Stanfield, and walked her through her situation. And she laughed, she cried, she had an incredible insight and knew what to do by the end of that, 10-minute conversation. And it happened so fast, and it moved her so much that powerful moment was like, this is a gift that is, you can't even put a dollar amount on. I would like to empower other people to give this gift to other people and do my best to share it with as many people as possible. So that was my inspiration, was actually experiencing it and realizing, oh, this is gold.
I love that. And I can safely say that it was me being in your coaching class that inspired me to become a coach as well. So that's really amazing. But absolutely, I not only being in your class, but then also having the opportunity to have a coaching session with you. I just remember after our 10 minutes, I was like, I think I have like a whole business plan right now. And
awesome.
I was taking all these notes, but yeah, it is incredibly impactful, especially when you lean into it, both as the coach and the coachee. Yes. When you're both like fully present, it really can, it can change lives. It really does.
Oh, and Natasha, I have to thank you because I just went back to that moment in front of that room in Grace Dodge Hall where you so bravely volunteered to be my coachee in front of a whole room of 20 plus officers from the military, and we thought through a conversation together out loud. And because of your vulnerability and your willingness to just think out loud with me, I bet you other people were able to see the power behind having a conversation like that. And thanks for sharing, because it's really neat. You have your PhD, you've worked your way all the way up the ranks. You've been teaching executive coaching now, and to know that you were that moved as well is really special. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. Okay, so now where can people find you and learn more about you and your work and your projects?
Awesome. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, so you could Google me with Alison Walling Chaney. My maiden name will be in parentheses now. So my married name is Chaney. So you can find me on LinkedIn, connect, send me a note there. That's probably a really easy, stable place. I have a website, so wallingandassociates.com, and the and in between Walling and Associates, it's spelled out AND. So you can find me there, and there's a place to just say contact us, so you can find me there. You can also email me, Allison@wallingandassociates.com. Happy to chat and think through anything with anybody who's interested in this type of work.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, it was so much fun. What a gift to be able to just think together and have fun with all the tools that are out there. We have a pretty awesome industry and so many scholars and researchers and practitioners. We're standing on the shoulders of giants for sure.
In this episode, Alison and I touched on a lot of topics, the most prevalent of which were amygdala hijacking and Marshall Goldsmith's transactional errors. To explore these concepts more for your own self-development, I would invite you to journal about a few questions and a quote. The first question is, which of the 20 transactional errors do you use the most often, and what can you do to be more aware when you are using it? The second question is, in the past, what events caused you to experience an amygdala hijack, and what did you do to overcome that? The quote that I have for you is from Andrea J. Lee, who said, "I believe that wherever there is mastery, coaching is occurring. And whenever coaching is done, mastery will be the outcome." Thank you for listening to this episode of Equipping Leaders. All of the resources mentioned in this episode can be found on my website, NatashaCheyenne.com, as well as timestamps to help you get right to the resource that you are looking for. On the website, you can also find a weekly leadership journal entry, a resource page with challenges and downloadable content, a place to sign up for my weekly newsletter, and an upcoming leadership platform full of workshops. You can also follow me on Instagram @novel_Natasha and on Twitter and Facebook @Natasha Cheyenne. If you'd like to hear more about a specific topic, please reach out and let me know. Join me next week for another episode.